The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome. This is Terry O'Reilly, founder of OBP Australia, running one of the very few webinars I'm doing this year. So this one is on online video interviews. So just make yourself comfortable. If you want to grab a drink or something to eat, please do so. I'll just wait a few minutes. We've got a lot of people coming this evening. So we are probably 60% full at the moment. So just give people a few more minutes to get here. People are logging in very quickly at the moment. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you want to send a message, you can click in the chat box and just send it through, and I can see that. Hopefully at the end of the session, I'll be able to get to everybody's questions. Maybe if you want to test it now, you can just let me know where you are. I know we've got a lot of people who are viewing from overseas who are waiting to get the borders open again. So many people have their visas, but just waiting to get the borders open so they can get here and start looking for work and settle. So if you want to send me a message, do so, and I'll be able to respond. And we'll get to those as we come through, just to let me know where you are. That would be useful. Okay, I'll just give people a few more minutes. If you want to grab something to drink, do so now. There's not going to be much happening in the next minute. Okay, let's get started. So as I said before, this session is going to be on video interviews, and with the prominence of interviews at the moment, it's a really important topic. In this current climate, almost all initial job interviews are being conducted via video. So what do you need to do to perform at your best via Zoom, usually, or some other platform? But let's have a look. So let's get straight into it. We'll be covering this evening the following topics. So we're going to look at the difference between recorded and live sessions. We're going to look at the fact that it is the new normal. So most of you are probably at home now, spending days on Zoom, attending Zoom meetings and so on. We'll look at some of the technical considerations. We'll look at what makes impressive communication. We'll look at some of the common questions that are asked in interviews. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at the video resume and some of my reservations about those. And I'll direct you to some links and some further support if you need that beyond this session. So let's get into it. So let's start with the recorded interviews. I'm not sure whether many people are aware of these or have had them, but this is used as a screening device. So primarily to check your communication skills. So what normally happens, they're great for employers because they get to hear and see you, which is something that the resume can't do. So particularly for client-facing roles, so sales and marketing, account manager roles, they're really useful. They also allow the employer to deal with a large volume of candidates. So an employer may normally, with face-to-face interviews, be able to handle 5 or 6 people to be interviewed. With the recorded ones, they can handle 50 with ease. So it allows them to see more people, remembering they don't have to actually listen to the whole recording. They can fast forward if they choose to, and means they don't have to spend a lot of time on each person, so they can move forward quickly. So basically the way they work is you get set questions, you're given a link to access the portal, you click on that link and you're given a couple of minutes to respond to maybe 5 or 6 prompts, and from that they assess your performance at interview. You usually only get one chance. Some of them will have a function which allows you to do a practice, but most of them you just click record and away you go, and that's your performance. Okay, moving on. The other is, of course, live interviews, which are similar to face-to-face, but of course they're done over Zoom or another platform. They're at a set time, similar to a face-to-face interview. That can be with a panel, or sometimes you're asked to do a presentation. So in that case, you're given control of the presentation and asked to present on something they've requested. So this often happens in marketing and sales roles, strategy roles, where you're asked to give your ideas. And of course, they're human interaction. So that means that it's like a real interview. There's another person in the room as opposed to the recorded one. So we'll be covering both of those and what they mean. They are the new normal. So even before COVID, probably 2 or 3 years ago, we started to see the big four consultancies use recorded interviews. Then it moved into the creative areas, software developers. The last few months, I've had quite a few data science, data analyst applicants who are being presented with these recorded video interviews. So they're quite daunting. You only get one chance. There's no person at the other end. They're very cold and quite difficult to handle. As we talked before, most people are probably having Zoom meetings at work, so you're becoming more and more familiar with video interviews, not so much interviews, but video interaction at least. And it looks like it is the future as well as the present. So I don't think we're going back. We don't really know when this COVID situation is going to be over. But even when it is, we have discovered that there are some benefits from working home, at least partially from home. So that's likely to continue. So it's an area that needs developing. All right, let's have a bit of a poll, see if we can get people to answer this question for me, which might be useful. Okay, I'm going to ask you, what is the most important for video interviews? If you can just choose there, whether you think it's video, audio, background, or communication, just give that a go. I'll give you a few seconds to get your response in, and then I'll share that with everybody. We've got 60%, 70, 80%, 85. I'll give a few more seconds and I'll close that off. So just put in a vote there. I'll cut it off when it gets to 95. Okay, I'll close it now. And let's have a look at the results there. I'll share that with you. So interesting, 67%, sorry, communication. Of course, if you don't have that, it's a complete waste of time. So that's a logical response there. Audio over video, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, and 10% background. Okay, so nothing surprising there, but yeah, good to see. Okay, let's hide that and get back into it. Okay, so let's have a look at the technical setup before we go any further. I really strongly advise against using your phone. I know some people love to do this. They do it from their car, anywhere they like. They're very comfortable in doing an interview via their phone. There are some inherent problems with that. One, it's a small screen. So if you're asked to read anything on the screen, if you're asked to share anything, it's quite difficult with a phone. The other thing, of course, is that you can get calls during that interview, which can really stuff up the interview itself. So my suggestion is to use a computer. If you have the opportunity to do that, that's a much better option. Check to see whether your internet connection is strong. That's very important that you have good coverage and it's robust. Make sure there's no interruptions. So whether that be kids, dogs, partners, people you're living with, whatever it is, try to find a quiet space so that, yeah, it's a good communication you have with the interviewer. Now, check the specs. So for recorded interviews, what they tend to do is they'll send you an email, and on that email, there'll be some specifications. Usually it's about the type of browser that's best suited for the recorded interview, but there'll be other things about your audio and perhaps your video as well, and any other software. So really check that to make sure you've covered everything. The last thing you want is to be stressed out at the recorded session and realize that you're not using the right browser, or there's something else that you haven't checked before you started. Test it with a friend. Very useful to do is to get somebody else to sit at your computer and you go somewhere else and you can assess what it looks like, what it sounds like, and so on. And become familiar with your equipment. So what we're talking about here is your settings. So if you need to adjust your audio or check your camera, just make sure you're familiar where you can find all of those things. Lighting. So pretty simple. Get it on your face is the easiest thing to say. It doesn't have to be directly on your face, but you may need to use some desk lamps to improve the lighting in your room if it's not so great. Yeah, important to get some extra lighting. Most computers are pretty good at compensating for poorly lit subjects, subject being you. But one thing you need to check is where are the windows. So let's have a look at this example here. So you can see the difference between, excuse me, A and B. A, of course, has daylight flooding in behind through the windows. No matter what computer you have, that's going to be pretty tough to compensate for, so you get a shadowy face. The other side, the B, the blinds have been drawn and the light is on the face, probably a little bit overexposed there. Too much light, but it's better to have too much than not enough. And of course, you wouldn't wear a hoodie to an interview. So there's an example of A and B. Just check out your room, see what you need to do, make sure you're positioning any windows in the room so that they're not behind you. Background. So we like to call this the professional domestic. People are staying home at work, so we're used to people now working in the home environment. So it doesn't have to be an amazing background. It doesn't have to be a home office, but you do need to give some thought as to how you are appearing on the screen and what it says about you as well. So if your best internet reception is in the laundry or the bathroom, it may not be the best place to run an interview. So have a think about what's behind you. Anything that is a distraction will be noticed. So if you're in front of a bookshelf, people will be looking at the titles of the books. If you have laundry piled up, whatever it is, you need to cover that just to make sure that you do look as professional as possible. Camera. Now, most computers will have cameras that are sufficient for running video. I'm just using one at the moment through an HP computer. It's not great. It's not the best camera, but it's good enough for the job. If you feel that yours is very grainy, you might want to check the light. So often you don't get a very clear picture if you don't have sufficient light. So try it with as much light as possible. And if it's still not good enough, you might want to consider getting an external webcam. If you do that, make sure you position it so that it is in line with where you're speaking. So don't have it positioned to the side, and be conscious of where it is, because that's the person. You're speaking to the camera, that's the person. It's best to have the camera at eye level. So for most of you, the computer will be at the top of your screen. There were some old HPs many years ago that were at the bottom of the screen for some reason. I don't know why they put them there, but it distorted your face and it looked up your nose. So that will require you to put your computer on a stand or some books or something to raise the level so that it's at eye level. It will look much better. And remember, your camera is human. This is the person you're speaking to. So we have a natural tendency to look at ourselves or the person we're talking to in a picture-in-picture. So what's really important is that you are concentrating on that hole in your screen, which is the person, your camera. And don't forget to smile. So have a look at the image there. You see I've got look here, the camera being at the top of the screen. You may know it's there, but it's very easy to get distracted and start looking at yourself or the interviewer. So just be conscious of that. So here's an example. Just take a look at that. And you can see the difference in the connection when somebody's looking into the camera and they're smiling. Simple. Two very simple things, but make a huge difference in the way you come across in a conversation online. So just have a think about that. Okay, it looks like we are full. So those people who got into this webinar have come in as the first 100 people, which is great. I think we had something like 280 registered. So there are going to be people who miss out. This will be recorded. So those who get the recording, or those who registered, will also get the recording as well. So have a look at that image there. You want to try to look into the camera as much as possible. Again, don't wear a hoodie to an interview, of course. All right, there's some more examples here. So let's just have a look at these people on the screen. We've got 9 individuals, all attending a Zoom session. Have a think about which ones you think are connecting with the person on the other side. So for example, the woman in the top left with the red background, she may be very engaged in the conversation, but she's clearly looking at something else. She's not looking at the camera. So this is what you want to try and avoid. Particularly in a job interview, they want to feel like they've met you. And imagine if you were in a room with somebody and they never looked you in the eye. That's the sort of impression you're going to give if you're not concentrating on where the camera is on your computer. So most of these people look like they're having fun. It's more like a social Zoom, I would imagine. The guy on the left-hand side in the middle with his head on his hand looks a little bit bored. So just be conscious of how you're appearing. It's okay to drink during the interview. Probably not wine like that woman is drinking on the right-hand side, but it's okay to keep your throat moist and have a drink with you just in case you get a bit dry and croaky, as I've got here. But have a look at the people here. Which ones are giving you the warm feeling? Which ones feel like you could work with? Now, by contrast, have a look at the people who are on the screen at the moment. Now, the first thing I need to say is these are stock photos, so they are a little bit unnatural. They're shot with an expensive camera and professional lighting, so they look better and clearer. They're not shot through a computer as well. The point I'm trying to get across by showing you these is that all of these people are smiling and looking at the camera. So if you have a look at the woman in the middle, who's the largest photo, you'll see that it really feels like she's in the room, and anybody else around there, even though they might not have a huge smile, they're all looking at the camera, and I feel like there's some connection with those people, as opposed to the ones here who are not. So particularly the top left and the bottom right woman, who are distracted by other things on the screen, most likely themselves and the other person they're talking to. So just have a think about how you look. Take a screenshot, record yourself, and see whether you're making a connection with the computer, which is the human at the other end. All right, now I like the poll response because people put audio above video, which is great. People will put up with poor quality video. If it's pixelating, if it freezes, it's not such a huge issue. Poor audio is disastrous because that's where the message is. So spend some time thinking about how you sound. The options on the screen, the options on the screen, at the moment I'm using what's called a condenser mic. You don't have to use one of these. I use these for recordings mainly. You have options of a headset with a microphone. You can use the computer's microphone, or you can use an earpiece with a microphone on the lead. Just be mindful if you use the computer's internal mic, it may not be strong enough. Unless you're using a Mac, most other computers have pretty poor internal microphones. They're not really designed for that. So if you can use a headset with a microphone, it's good. And make sure it's a decent quality headset as well. The problem with some of the earpieces, so the bottom picture on the right, the white earplugs with the microphone about 5 centimeters down from the earpiece, is that these have a tendency to pull away from the connection. So you may be using them one day and they're fine. You've been using them on your phone all the time, it's fine. And then all of a sudden you've pulled it too hard, and what happens is the wires slightly disconnect and you'll get crackling. Or you may have stood on it, or it's cracked at some point and it's compromised the integrity of the wire. So these are probably the most problematic of all the earpieces. So a substantial headset is fine, or the computer in your the microphone internally in your computer. If you do that, just make sure that there's not a lot of ambient noise as well, because that will take in what's around. So think about the quality of the microphone, where it's positioned. So sometimes with the earpiece ones, you may have to raise the microphone to your mouth to get sufficient levels. Do a test, record it, make sure it's not too soft. You can never be too loud. The person can turn you down, but they can only turn you up so much. So just make sure that that's satisfactory for your needs. And have a plan B. So have a separate headset. If one fails, grab the other one. If you use an external mic, you can switch to the computer mic. You know how to do that quickly. Just make sure that that's all possible. Okay, that's the technical side of things. Let's have a look at the communication, because after all, it's still an interview and it's about communicating with somebody on the other side. They're not in the room. It's a bit more distant, being remote, but we still have to communicate. So let's look at some of the things we do to prepare for an interview in general, because they are important for this process as well. The first one there is knowing the employer. Now, it's really important that you do your research on the company. It's not enough to go into an interview with the "this is me, this is what I've done" attitude. Do you want me? It's 50-50. You have to show the employer that you understand what they do, what their business is, what their challenges might be, and so on. I remember many years ago when I was working in a role, I was on an interview panel for admin staff, and one of the candidates came into the interview. She was 5 minutes late, rushed in. We offered her a drink, and she said, "Look, I'm sorry I'm late. I've applied for so many jobs and I got lost, and I'm just getting really confused. Can you tell me which job this is?" And of course, we felt like saying the interview is over at that point. She hadn't done any research into the type of organization we were, and she was just hoping that her 20 years experience was good enough to work anywhere. Well, it's not, and she needed to pay more attention to the workplace she was going into to demonstrate an understanding of the business. So that's really important. Now, that's an extreme example. It only happened once in my 20 years in that role, but it's an example you want to stay a long way from. Okay. The second part is to know the role itself. Now, you can't convince somebody you can do a job unless you know what's involved. So this might mean doing a little bit more research than you can find from the position description and the internet. You may have to contact someone in the company to find out what platforms they use, find out what their challenges are, what software, what projects, what systems they have in place, what ERP they're using, if that's relevant to your role, and so on. So you can get all this information, but it does take a little bit of extra work, but it will really impress the employer. Having an understanding of what their problems are, and then going in saying, "Look, I understand you're facing this is what you're trying to do," and then you back it up with what you've done that's relevant to their needs. So that's really important. The third one then, know your stuff. This is pretty simple. The technical aspects of your job you have to be able to talk about. Now, you can't demonstrate your skills because generally that doesn't happen in an interview situation. So you have to be able to talk about it because that's the only way somebody can assess you. And a professional peer, so an engineer talking to an engineer, a developer talking to a developer, you can't fool them. They will know within 30 seconds of you talking your depth of knowledge on the subject matter. So you have to know your stuff and you have to be able to talk about it. Now, it's one thing to have that knowledge in your head and to be able to do it. It's a different skill to be able to explain it. So it's really important that you spend time on being able to articulate what it is that you have done from a technical perspective. One of the pieces of feedback I get from employers is when they meet people at interview, they say, "He didn't sound like the person in his resume," which actually means they weren't able to communicate what they had done. They didn't sound like the professional in the CV. So make sure you can talk about your stuff, your technical stuff. Also, you have a chance to prepare for some answers, and we're going to have a look at some questions in a moment in a little bit more detail. You've got your chance to prepare for things that you know you're going to be asked. So there's no excuse for not being able to articulate well certain questions. So, answers to common questions, particularly the behavioural questions. So what we're talking about here is questions that ask you to tell a story. And you need to use some sort of structure to do this, and one of the common ways is to use the STAR approach, the situation, task, action, and result, to explain your story. The value in this is it creates a structure. The interviewer will know this structure, so they know where you're up to in your story, and it keeps you on track. Without some sort of structure, people tend to spend a very long time on the situation, explaining where you were and what was happening, and they never get to the point. So what this does, it helps you get to the point. There really should be no reason why you need to speak more than a couple of minutes for any response. When you think about it, when you're at work and you're talking to people, very rarely does somebody talk for more than 2 minutes. It's short exchanges. So it's question, answer, get clarification, further explanation, and so on. This is what you want to try and create in an interview as well. And we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. But keep your answers brief. Don't ramble. Another piece of feedback, critical feedback we get from employers, is that the person spoke too much. I don't think I've ever had an employer tell me that somebody didn't speak enough. So people tend to go on and talk off tangent about things that are irrelevant to the question. They haven't answered the question adequately. So this is a real problem, and try to be brief and to the point. The next one is conversation, not interrogation. Now, the way an interview is structured, the interviewer has all the questions, and you're expected to provide great answers. The problem with this is it's not natural. This is not what happens at work. So you need to change this so that you're not feeling like you're 10 years old again and the teacher is quizzing you and you're trying to produce the right answers. If that's your frame of mind, you're on the wrong track. You need to turn it around and make it a conversation. And the way we do this is for you to have questions for the interviewer. So you can add these questions at the end of one of your responses to get a natural flow to the conversation. So if you're giving your response and at the end of it you might say something like, would you like me to explain in more detail about this particular aspect? Or something else as a question tag to add on, which allows the interviewer to ask for more information, to say, no, that's fine, that's adequate, whatever. Try to create a conversation, not be part of an interrogation. Take along questions you'd like to ask. Now, the interview is not just about you getting the job and being good enough for the job. You don't know everything about the job when you arrive at the interview. You need to find out more. It's an information gathering exercise for you as well. So you've got to ask questions about the job. Then you can make some assessment of whether it's the best job for you. Maybe you don't want this job. I've had situations where my clients have been sent to an interview via a recruiter and find out when they get there that the job is a really poor fit and are wondering why they've been sent in the first place. So it's part of your job to identify what the key requirements are of the job, what's really going to be done, what are their real challenges, and then you can decide this is not for me, or yeah, I've done that before, I think I can handle this. Remember, above all, the interviewer is trying to assess whether you're going to fit in. As I said before, the technical stuff is easy. They can work that out pretty quickly whether you can do the job. And 99% of the time when somebody gets appointed and if things go wrong, it's not because they can't handle the technical aspect of the job, it's because of a people-related problem. So what they're trying to do in this 30 minutes, an hour with you is to identify whether they think they can work with you, whether you can work in their team. How are you going to be able to take instructions? Are you going to be able to share your knowledge and expertise? Are you friendly? Do you laugh at the right times? Are you smiling? Are you relaxed? Can they have a chat to you about what's on TV, what you're doing on the weekend? This is really important stuff. It's not all about you as the professional. It's about you as the person. So try to work on getting that good rapport with the interviewer, and we'll look at ways of doing that. You want to make it as natural as possible. So that's all about good communication. Right, with my clients, we work on this in a very structured way, I suppose. So where you have questions where you know you're going to be asked certain things, what we do is we start by looking at the question and working out a response by writing down what you want to say. We do this because it allows you to be clear with your thoughts. When we speak, we start down this track, we come back, we go another way, go back the other way. This is natural. We're sorting through what we're going to say as we say it. I'm doing it now. You make mistakes, you come back, you change your mind, you use a different word. Let's try and get it better. You know what questions are going to be asked. Let's try and be more efficient in the language you use so you can get your answer out easily and efficiently, so you're not wasting their time and you're using the best words. So we do this by writing down. So you write it down and you check it. You check to see whether this is really what you want to say. Is it the best way of saying it? Could I substitute that word for this word? Is there a better word I could use there? And get somebody else to check it. And this is where I come in, and I'll give you advice on, maybe a better way of expressing what you're trying to say. Once you've had it checked, then you practice, you rehearse. You rehearse many times, and you record and you listen. So it's really important to hear yourself, and it's not possible to listen to yourself while you're speaking in the same way. Use your phone. Record your response, play it back, and you'll see, even without any other feedback, you'll see where you can improve. It's probably the most valuable thing you can do in preparation for an interview is to hear and see yourself. So do that, and you rehearse, record, listen, and after you've done that, get some feedback. Feedback from somebody else who is knowledgeable in this area. So what I tend to do at this point, I'm very constructive and encouraging with somebody when they try, but there's always ways you can improve your response. So the feedback is really important. And that might mean going back and writing something again, checking it, and going back around this circle again. So practice is important, but it's also getting the feedback that's really critical. So let's have a look at how I would give that feedback to a client in preparation for a response to a behavioral question. So for this one, we're going to use the STAR approach. And why it's good to get somebody to help you with this. If you simply write your situation, your task, action, results, and what you learnt from that process, and say it and practice, it could be all wrong, or it could be a lot better. So it's important to get somebody else to have some input, to make sure that the message is clear and that it's the best way of expressing what you're trying to say. So what I get to do, this is a trick here you can try yourself. I get people to write one sentence for each of these. So to explain the situation, which is basically where you're working and what you're doing, and maybe when you were doing this, that's part of the situation. Explain it in one sentence. Explain the task, what you did, in one sentence. Sorry, what you had to do. Explain what you did, the action you took in one sentence, and explain the result of that in one sentence, and what you learnt from that example in one sentence. Then go back and fill in with more information where it's needed. Now, the value of doing this is that it creates the structure before you start to add detail. Because what people will tend to do is they'll start with the situation and they'll add everything in the situation. They'll explain what the task was and what they did all in the first 10 seconds, and you've lost your structure. So the situation is probably going to be the longest one. It requires a little bit of setup to explain where you were and what you're doing. So let's keep it at that and not breach into the other areas of the structure. The task can always be a simple sentence. What was your task? What did you have to do? And the action may be 2 or 3 things that you did to implement that. And the results may be 1 or 2 points as to the outcome. And a learning should be maybe 1 thing, perhaps 2 things that you learned through that process. So sitting down with somebody going through the writing stage for the STAR response is really useful because you can refine it with somebody else's ear. Important to get help. Now, one of the problems in writing things down, so everything that I've just said to you started with writing. The problem here is that written English is very different from spoken English. We don't speak in complete sentences. We don't use words like moreover or in addition to start our sentence. These are words we use in written English. So if you write something down in that writing style, it's going to sound very unnatural. So first thing you do is when you're writing, you have to write down as if you were speaking. That's the first thing. And then make sure that it's not too formal and it doesn't sound too much like you're reading writing. So we don't speak in complete sentences. We want to appear natural, not over-prepared and robotic. And you want to be fluent and clear. This comes through the practice side of things. And definitely no reading. So if you're on a video interview and you have, an answer in front of you written on a piece of paper or on your laptop minimized and you start reading a response, it's a disaster. They don't want to hear you read and they'll know you're reading. You have to forget about what you've practiced. And as far as trying to get the exact words, that's not important. What's important is the message comes across, it's fluent and clear, and you've included all the information that you need to. Don't worry about getting the words exactly right, exactly the way you wrote them. That's not the purpose. They'll never see that writing anyway. They only have the spoken English to go by. So let's work on how you sound, practicing recording and listening back to that. Now, one advantage you do have, probably the only advantage of a video interview, is that they can't see you. They can't see your surrounds. So you can use prompts, right? You couldn't take any notes into an interview and just start reading from the notes as you're going to jog your memory. It might look a bit odd when you're not paying attention to somebody, but you have the luxury of sitting at your computer and they can't see what's around you. So you're about to go into your Zoom message and you have a couple of post-it notes behind you to make sure you don't forget critical information you need to get across. So the examples you have there, on the left-hand side, you've got 3 questions. These are 3 questions that I want to ask the interviewer at some stage about the challenges they're facing in the company, whether there's the likelihood of remote working. So there was some mention about different offices. I want to know what's happening there. And what sort of career progression. So these are the things that I wanted to ask the employer. I don't want to leave that interview without asking those questions. So I have them there as bullet points. On the other side, I've got 3 things that I need to get across about me, things that are important to my case. My PO automation, a SAP migration I worked on, and the fact that I worked in a Cisco environment. Now, they need to come up at some stage. Now, maybe you talk about those things during the interview. That's fine. You've covered them. All done. But this will help you make sure you don't forget anything. Now, one thing I suggest not to do is to have written paragraphs. You won't be able to read dense text in a stressful situation of an interview. You just need something to jog your memory, and the rest of the time you just have to wing it. You do your best. So there's some things you can do in a video interview that you can't do face-to-face. Okay, let's have a look at some common questions. So, the first 2 there, tell me about yourself and why have you applied for this role? Pretty much 100% guaranteed to be asked on any interview. So, there is no reason why you can't have a great response to those questions. You know they're going to be on the interview, prepare for them. And yeah, the next three, the blue ones there, what is your strength, weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What project are you most proud of? Certainly are not guaranteed, but they are common. So they're probably 3 of maybe 20 common questions that are asked at interview. Again, make sure you have some answers for these prepared. You should be able to predict 95% of what's going to be asked in an interview. So if you can sound clear and fluent with your responses for the ones that you were expecting, that's great. And the other 5% that might stump you, well, that's only a small percentage of the interview. So overall, you're going to sound like you know what you're talking about and you can articulate it. The red ones there, give me an example of how you have managed change and tell me about a conflict you've had with a manager. Behavioral questions. So these are prompts for you to tell a story. So this is where you apply the STAR approach or some other structure that will allow you to tell a story briefly and clearly. The last one there, is there anything you would like to add, is again a guaranteed. I'd be a bit concerned if they didn't ask this question because it's the only opportunity for you to direct the conversation. So make sure you refer to your notes in that situation to make sure you haven't missed anything and you can put your case again or maybe reiterate something or maybe mention something that you hadn't covered but you think would help your case. Okay, finally, just before we finish up with these. Now, you may not be aware of what video resumes are, but I've had quite a few people come to me using these, and I'm going to let you know why I consider them a bad idea and what my reservations are. The purpose of a resume is to explain to the reader, or in this case, the viewer and listener, what's relevant in your experience to their needs. Now, the problem with a video resume as a product is that you don't know who your audience is. It's a little bit like your LinkedIn profile, I guess. Anybody can see it. So you're just sending out this product that explains who you are. Well, that's a bit of a hit and miss. It's a scattergun approach. It's not really targeted. You're better off waiting to find out what an employer wants and then putting your case in other ways. So I'm concerned that the video resume doesn't really take into account who the audience is. That's the first thing. The second question I would ask is it putting your best foot forward? Now, I often tell people if their English is not great, that should not be the first thing you do is to ring a company on the phone. It's important to put your best foot forward to make your first impression the best as possible. And for most people, that's going to be a really well-composed resume or a well-composed email or something along those lines. By all means, if you have great communication skills, fantastic, ringing is fine. But you have to put your best foot forward, and I don't think the video is anybody's best foot. I've yet to see that anyway. I think there are far better ways to make a first impression, and remember, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So let's make it your best one. And finally, I'd also ask who's advising you and do they have cultural understanding? So the people I've seen use these think they are doing the right thing, but generally it's somebody advising them who doesn't have a deep understanding of Australian culture or the job market or how that video will be perceived. And my feeling is the ones that I've seen have come across as desperate, unprofessional, and awkward. And that's not what you want to be doing. And most people are not that, but it gives that false impression. So I don't offer video resumes. I could, but I really think they are detrimental to your chances, and I'm happy for anybody to show me one that they think is great. I haven't seen it yet in the 16 years I've been doing this. They are popping up every now and then. People are paying a lot of money, something like $5,000 to get a professionally produced video resume. I seriously suggest that you consider that again. Okay, second poll. We're nearly done, so just stick with me for a moment. We're going to ask you, what do you individually need to improve the most? So if you can just respond to that, do you need to prepare and practice your answers? Are you more concerned about your technology setup, general communication skills, or your industry knowledge? Okay, we're nearly there. 80%, 85, 90. I'm just about to close it off. Okay, I'm going to close and share the response. Interesting. Preparing and practicing answers. Yep, not surprising, but interesting to see that. Okay. All right, just before we finish up and I start taking questions, I want to just direct you to a few other resources you may be interested in. So these are all free links through OBP Australia. Most of you will know that I have a YouTube channel. So it's full of useful advice, plenty of videos, as you can see in there, on a range of topics, not just video interviews, of course. We offer a range of services, but it's worth checking out if you want to have a look at that. I won't go through all of these, but these are some links. You'll get a connection to this video itself, and you can click on these links. I'll also send these in a separate email to everybody who has registered for this session. Also, check out the articles on LinkedIn. Now, articles are a little bit archaic. They're not used much anymore. Most of people on LinkedIn use posts. So these are the short versions. The articles are the longer versions. You have to look for these, but these go into more detail, and they're far more useful, I think, than just the posts. So have a look at both of those, the YouTube channel and also the articles on LinkedIn as part of the blog. All right, if anybody's looking for one-to-one coaching, we do offer that, of course. It's $250 plus GST. The way we approach it is, first of all, we start off by, I give you some preparation materials to read. These are things like common questions, how to prepare for the interview, and so on. So this prepares you for your first session. Now, it's delivered over 2 sessions, a 90-minute and a 60-minute session, a total of 2.5 hours, which is done online. It's recorded, and you get to keep the copies of the recording so you can review your performance, listen to my feedback as much as you like. It's one-to-one, which is really important. Now, as useful as this is this evening, it's not really helping you with your situation. So everybody is different. Everybody has different barriers and different problems and things they want to improve. So really the only way to do this is through one-to-one. It's one of the reasons I don't spend a lot of time on creating products for sales. I only use a service, and it's always a one-to-one service. So I don't run classes. It's always working with individuals. The 2 sessions are done and they are separated. So the idea is we do the first session, we look at questions, we look at preparing for the interview, you do practice, I give you feedback and so on. Then there's a gap, and the longer that gap is, the better, because then you get more time to practice and digest what was discussed in the first session. Then we have the second session. We do a little bit of repetition, new questions, more practice, more recording, and further feedback. And I'll give you some exercises to work on to help you improve your performance in the interview. So if you're interested in that, just let me know. I'll give you the contact details shortly. For other services with OBP Australia, you can visit the website. So we offer everything related to the application. So all things required: CV, cover letter, key selection criteria, contacting the employer. I assist with networking, helping people get in touch with people from their industry to access the hidden job market. Everything else, such as workplace communication, whether it's your writing or speaking, we can help with that as well. My background is as an English language teacher, working with overseas-born professionals. So this is my area of expertise and industry liaison through my work with companies. I didn't come into this as a recruiter, which is quite different from most people. I don't work as a recruiter. I work helping you, the client, the person trying to get work, the job seeker. So it's a little bit unusual, my angle on this whole approach to getting work. So that's how it works. There's a list of services that we do offer. If anybody wants to have a free consultation, that's fine. I'm happy to do that, but I need to see your resume first. And you need to have full work rights to work in Australia. So if you don't have that, I can't help you. So if you don't have a visa, if you're on a tourist visa, I really can't help until you get something that allows you to work here. If you're a student, that's possible, but you need to realize the restrictions with your work hours, and we can work around that. So just send me your resume, doesn't matter what it looks like, just something that gives me an idea of your background, and I can follow up on that and maybe organize a time to meet. So people, if you have any questions, excuse me, I'm a bit croaky. I'm going to go through and have a look if anybody's got their hand up or if you simply want to post. So if there's an icon with a hand, if you put that up, I will answer that question. These can be general, they can be specific. I'm just going through to see if anybody has got their hand up. A lot of familiar names and faces here. Some current clients. I've got a few people who have interviews tomorrow, so hopefully they get a good night's sleep and are prepared for tomorrow's interview. Now, Arshin, I'm going to just, if I ask you a question, just make sure your microphone is on. And you're self-muted, Arshin, so I can't get you off that. If you want to speak, you need to put your hand up. Or if anybody wants to post, they are most welcome to post a question as well. Arvin, would you like to ask a question, Arvin?
Actually, yeah, I have a question. What sort of services do we receive for resume and cover letter by your company?
Okay, so the way we work with the resume and cover letter, we do those. So the first thing with the resume, we work on what's called a base resume. So this is one that's used to develop subsequent versions for specific jobs. Now, the value of a resume is in addressing a job. So we work with the application. So once we've created the base resume, we work with you on up to 12 separate job applications. So when you apply for a job, you send the position description to me along with your resume and the cover letter we've already created. Then I make changes to that against the job description. So that's the critical part. Okay, it's not just getting a magic resume, because a resume needs to change for every job. You can't really assess the effectiveness of a resume unless you know what job it's addressing.
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
No worries.
Yep.
Amitha. No. Okay, what about Chris? No. Okay, remember you have to have your microphone on if you are wanting to ask a question. Maybe I've covered most things, so people don't have that many questions. Okay, we have over 100. We'll have 100 people attending this. Lambert, do you want to ask? No.
Yes.
Lambert, is it?
Yes.
Hey, Lambert, how are you going?
Yeah. Oh, I'm good. Supposing you have this interview of the same role of the same company, how you go over it?
You mean you've had that interview before?
Yeah, and then you encountered another role and the same company.
And you've been invited for a second time?
Yes.
Okay, so they will know that, presumably. So there's nothing to hide. They want you back. It probably means you were very close last time. Okay, so it's a positive thing. I don't think you really need to handle it any differently, except maybe do the preparation that's required for that interview. That's also important, but it will probably be raised by them at the start. There's not necessarily any reason for you to bring it up if they don't, though. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Lambert.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got about 5 more minutes. So if you do want to ask a question, let's try Fatima. No? Fatima, you have your microphone on? Nope, I'll move on to somebody else. What about Harini? Hello, Harini, can you hear me?
Yeah, Terry. Very good evening to everyone, and really thanks, Terry, for this wonderful session.
Great.
And my question is like, when we try to attend an interview in a like a cross-cultured kind of thing, like when the interviewer is Asian, so is it normally my rate of speech would be very high. Okay, so. When I start the interview, obviously it will go in the pitch I normally do it. The tone and intonation will be in my way. Later, I try to understand the language. It is on the either way. Like if it is Western, they might talk very differently. Europeans, they talk differently because this is one of my experience. So where I couldn't get when a person was speaking or interviewing, I was like, could you please tell that again? And after some time they asked something, and again I said, could you please repeat it again? So I don't think it's something like how we can improve. It's a kind of a communication problem, okay, but how we can improve it?
Well, by practicing and speaking to as many different people as you can. I mean, Australia is a multicultural country. There are many different Englishes that are used here. So accents are very different depending on who you're speaking to. But it's not something that you develop or improve quickly. It's something that is done over time. Okay, so yes, there are things you can do to make a dramatic improvement with your language and your speaking and your listening. But it's really something that you need to work on over time, but putting yourself into as many situations as possible, social, work, getting out there and communicating. There's no substitute for speaking the language and listening. Okay, language is about communication. It's not about just understanding words. So often people come to me and say, look, I listen to TV all the time. I'm trying to improve my listening. It's really not about that. It's about getting out and talking. And immersing yourself in the culture, I think, is the really important part.
True. Normally, this I face not in the video interview because we do eye-to-eye contact, or we will talk and sync. But phone interview, yes, it happened.
Phone's tough. Phone is really tough. You can't see their body language, and sometimes the technology is not great. One thing about digital technology is very convenient, but the quality is often very, very poor. If you listen to how people sound on a mobile phone, for example, there are a lot of dropouts, a lot of data loss, and it makes it very hard to understand somebody whose English may not be easy to understand in the first place. What you need to do, though, you asked before about what if you don't understand them. You do have to ask them to repeat themselves by saying, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, or could you explain that again? Because if you don't know what they said, you can't give an answer. So even though you may feel like, oh no, I'm making a mistake here, I'm asking them to repeat themselves, you have to do it. Yeah?
True. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, we might have time for maybe one more. Elena, if you're there. Elena, how are you? And if you have your microphone on, you can ask a question.
Yes, I do. Hi, Terry.
Hey, how you going?
Yeah, thank you. Going right. My question is, if you had a phone interview, you've been selected, you had video interview, but then you've been unsuccessful for any reason, is it a good idea to call and ask for a feedback, or it's better just to leave it where it is?
Always call. Always ask for feedback. They may not be very helpful, You know, the feedback might not be very useful to you, but it's always important to ask because they may give you some really useful feedback. Yeah, so it's tough and you have to be strong and resilient and just get back up on the horse, so to speak, and keep trying, but really important to ask for feedback. I had a client yesterday who went for an interview and was sent a very detailed feedback email, and it was fantastic. They basically said what he needed to do to get work in Australia from a technical perspective, so the things that he was lacking. All right. Now, if it's something a little bit more personal, they may be more reluctant to say because it can be a bit confrontational. So if somebody's commenting on, you know, your language or something else about you that can be taken personally, you may not get that useful feedback, but always good to ask, Elena. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Okay, we'll do one more question if there's anybody with a hand up. Just let me see. What about Sai? Are you there, Sai? Hello, Sai. Can you hear me? No.
Hello, Terry.
Hello, Sai. How are you going?
I'm doing good. I have a question.
Sure.
Can I use a virtual background during the interview?
Depends what it is. What have you got? What's your background? I think it's more of a personal
I
thing.
heard many people who are using a green background.
Just a plain green screen, or they're using the actual, like a tropical island or something background?
Yeah, I mean the green screen.
Yeah, it's okay. And look, it's really an aesthetic thing, whether you think it looks good. How do you think it looks?
I don't think it's looking good.
Yeah, one of the problems is that it makes it a little bit the border of your hair and your head look a bit odd because there's never really a good separation from the background, so it can look a bit weird. I haven't seen any that I think are great. I mean, I've seen those ones that are actually an office background. I mean, people know they're an office background. You're probably better just to find a space at home. Are you having trouble finding a suitable location at home to film?
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay, all right. We might finish up, and thank you all for joining me. Now, you will get an email with a link to take you to this video recording. So hopefully it's been helpful. And if anybody has any further questions, just shoot me an email through to enquiries@obpaustralia.com.au. You can also use Terry, Terry, at obpaustralia.com.au. That will also get through to me. Okay, have a nice evening. Stay safe.
Thank you, Terry.
No worries.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye,
Okay,
everybody.
thanks.
Everyone have a nice
Bye.
evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.